They filled the halls with lights. They rolled out the future of mobility in polished steel and chrome. Every corner of the 2025 New York Auto Show was covered by the media, from electric SUVs to autonomous sedans, each vying for headlines, likes, and views. And then there was Maxwell Chikumbutso's self-powered car. A car that allegedly charges itself. A car that doesn't need a conventional plug or charging station. A car that could challenge the assumptions of the global EV market. And yet almost nobody talked about it. No primetime coverage. No viral social posts. No interviews in glossy magazines.
Why?
At first glance, it seems impossible. After all, the invention is audacious, a bold claim that defies decades of engineering orthodoxy. Critics say it's impossible. Skeptics label it a hoax. Supporters insist it's real. But there's more to the story than skepticism. Because in the world of high-profile auto shows, visibility isn't just about innovation. It's about perception. It's about networks. It's about which cars fit into the narrative the media and industry want to tell. Maxwell's car didn't arrive with a marketing machine. It didn't have the backers, the PR budgets, or the influencer tours. It arrived quietly from Africa, a region historically underestimated in high-tech innovation. And that matters, because the narrative of who builds the future of mobility is tightly controlled. The cameras were pointed at companies with billions of dollars in marketing and decades of established reputation. A lone inventor from outside the traditional tech ecosystem? That story didn't fit neatly into the headlines. Yet the engineers, journalists, and a few insiders who did see it, they left puzzled. Some couldn't explain how it seemed to generate energy. Others dismissed it outright. But a few asked questions that went beyond disbelief. Could this work, even partially? Could it be replicated? And if it does, what would it mean for the global EV market? Because the implications are staggering. A car that powers itself doesn't just disrupt consumer habits. It challenges entire supply chains. It threatens the dominance of legacy automakers. It calls into question who controls the energy of the future. And that tension between skepticism, opportunity, and disruption is exactly why the story was quietly sidelined at the show. The car wasn't flashy. It didn't have celebrity endorsements. It didn't fit the polished narrative of the 2025 auto landscape. And yet, for those who understand the stakes, it represented something far more significant than any glossy electric SUV on display. It was a signal that innovation can emerge anywhere, even where no one is expecting it. Because signals like this make people uncomfortable. Not because they're impossible, but because they force industries and governments to confront a truth they rarely face. Innovation doesn't have a passport. While the world's headlines were filled with familiar brands unveiling their newest EVs, Maxwell's car quietly sat in a corner, functional, mysterious, and largely ignored. But the people who looked closer noticed things others didn't. The energy system. The efficiency. The claim that it could operate without plugging into any grid. Even if only partially true, the implications are enormous. For global automakers, it's a threat to centralized energy models. For governments, it's a disruption to infrastructure planning. For consumers, it's a potential redefinition of personal mobility. And that may explain the silence. Because attention is not always given to the thing that is loudest. Sometimes it's given to the thing that can change everything quietly. Industry insiders told journalists that conversations were happening behind closed doors. Engineers were curious. Analysts were skeptical. And yet, some could not dismiss the technical possibility outright. It wasn't just hype. It wasn't just a prototype. There were measurements, demonstrations, and controlled observations, though few saw them firsthand. And that created a perfect storm. A device with disruptive potential, presented without media fanfare, and coming from a region rarely associated with breakthrough EV technology. That combination made it easy to ignore publicly, but impossible to ignore privately. Because in the world of innovation, the quiet ones are often the ones to watch. And for Maxwell Chikumbutso, that meant the story wasn't about winning awards, securing press coverage, or having flashy unveilings. It was about creating something real, something the world might not be ready to accept yet. And that's where the real tension begins. Because creating something real is one thing. Getting the world to notice, on your own terms, is another. Maxwell didn't have the backing of corporate PR teams, venture capitalists, or global media outlets. His story was organic, unpolished, and in many ways, inconvenient. Convenient for critics, too. They could dismiss it without ever testing it. They could question its feasibility without seeing it in action. And because the vehicle didn't parade through press conferences or celebrity endorsements, the narrative that emerged was simple. Nothing to see here. But those who were paying attention, engineers, energy analysts, and a few courageous journalists, saw something different. They saw an African inventor defying assumptions, challenging the idea that only established corporations could shape the future of electric mobility. They saw a vehicle that, at least in preliminary demonstrations, appeared to operate without conventional fuel or charging stations. And they asked questions that could not be ignored. Could this be scaled for mass production? Could it survive real-world testing on roads and under heavy usage? And if it worked, who would control the technology? Because the implications are bigger than the car itself. A self-powered vehicle isn't just a novelty. It threatens supply chains, energy infrastructure, and even geopolitical power balances. Which may be why, quietly, Maxwell's car was observed more than it was discussed. Because the moment the story went public in full, the world would have to confront it. And some institutions, it seems, weren't ready. Yet, despite the lack of coverage, word spread slowly, cautiously, through those who had seen it firsthand. They shared what they observed, framed in cautious language, often emphasizing that the results were preliminary but intriguing. And that's exactly where Maxwell's story sits today. And that quiet revolution is exactly what makes this story so compelling. Because when something doesn't fit the expected narrative, it forces the world to ask uncomfortable questions. Could innovation really come from places the mainstream has overlooked? Could decades of entrenched assumptions about energy, infrastructure, and mobility be challenged by a single device? And perhaps most importantly, what happens if it works better than anyone thought possible? Those questions aren't hypothetical. They carry real consequences. For automakers, it means a rethinking of how EVs are designed, manufactured, and distributed. For energy companies, it means revisiting the model of centralized grids and fuel dependency. For governments, it means evaluating what control over technology actually means in a world where innovation isn't confined to traditional power centers. And in the middle of all this sits Maxwell Chikumbutso, an inventor operating outside the conventional system, quietly demonstrating a technology that could alter the rules of the game entirely. Some observers remain skeptical, insisting the claims defy known physics. Others are cautiously intrigued, noting anomalies that cannot yet be explained. But every expert agrees on one point. The potential impact is enormous if even a fraction of what is claimed proves true. And that's why, despite being ignored by mainstream media, the story hasn't gone away. Because true innovation doesn't always arrive with a press release. Sometimes it arrives in quiet corners, observed only by those paying attention, and only fully understood once the world is ready to measure, replicate, and acknowledge it. And that's where the real intrigue begins. Because the car isn't just a vehicle, it's a signal. A signal that innovation can emerge outside the traditional corridors of power. That breakthroughs don't always come from Silicon Valley, Tokyo, or Munich. That sometimes the most disruptive technology is born in a place the world isn't looking, a garage, a small workshop, a backyard in Africa. Some insiders whisper about what they saw, subtle design choices that hint at energy recycling, magnetic resonance, or unconventional battery management. Others remain cautious, saying it could all be an elaborate prototype, a conceptual demonstration rather than a mass production-ready machine. But even if it's partially functional, the implications ripple far beyond one car or one auto show. Imagine a world where fuel stations are less relevant, where energy grids don't dictate mobility, where a vehicle could travel hundreds of miles without recharging. That's not science fiction. That's a strategic shift. And the people who understand that quietly take notes. Automakers, energy firms, and even government agencies are reportedly monitoring, analyzing, and debating what such a vehicle could mean, not for headlines, but for strategy. Meanwhile, the public sees little more than a whisper. A few videos, a couple of articles, and a lot of skepticism. But behind the scenes, this is exactly how revolutions take shape, slowly, quietly, unnoticed until suddenly they are unavoidable. And that's where we leave the story. Maxwell Chikumbutso's self-powered car may have been ignored on the bright floors of the 2025 auto show, but its impact can't be measured in headlines. Innovation rarely announces itself. It doesn't wait for applause or media coverage. It exists quietly, forcing those paying attention to ask difficult questions, to reconsider assumptions, and to imagine possibilities that once seemed impossible. Whether the car proves fully functional, partially functional, or ultimately unrepeatable, the idea it represents has already left a mark. That true innovation can come from anywhere, and that the next revolution in mobility might just arrive from the most unexpected places. In the end, it's not about recognition. It's about the signal, the hint of a future that challenges the world to think bigger, move faster, and pay attention to the quiet innovators rewriting the rules. Because in the world of breakthroughs, the ones who are ignored today often become the standard tomorrow.